Awesome. Awesome. Good content. We've all been to the exhibit hall. Got a lot of tickets. By the way, I heard we ran out. That's crazy. Good for you. I saw how many we had. So hopefully we're stimulating the mind. We're up here with four I guess, experts in various parts of many different fields, I guess, between public cloud, digital transformation, software engineering, product development, that kind of thing. So we thought it'd be pretty interesting to bring them together and have them introduce themselves, ask them some targeted questions that they probably already know the answer to. And then if we have some time, we actually have microphones set up over here. We will probably have a few minutes for Q&A. At least that's the plan. So be thinking about questions as we go through some of the conversations and the topics and the themes. And we'll see how we go. Sound good? Yeah? All right. Woo! All right. All right, first thing we're going to do is go through each of our expert panelists. And I'll start with you, Mohan.
Thanks, Jared. My name is Mohan Rao. I'm the Chief Product and Technology Officer at Streetshares. Streetshares is a fintech company. We offer small business lending as a service to banks. Previously, for the last 20 years, I've been CTO in the area in EdTech and telecom and GPS analytics and a couple of other areas. Got my start at Bell Labs, 9X Bell Labs up in New York, and I was also a Deloitte strategy consultant. So I've had a couple of early big companies, and then I've been in startup to scale companies, and really happy to be here.
Awesome. Thank you. Welcome. Marcelin?
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Marcelin Lovismartin from Walmart. I lead the data engineering for two of their domains, global governance and HR. And I had the pleasure of working with for Capital One for about 15 years. Right now, I have picked up some interest in the security and the privacy domain, learning that aspect in the data space. I'm a data guy, especially a data analytics guy. A fun fact, I'm collecting currencies and coins from different countries, including the Saddam Hussein era Iraq currency too.
Well, cool. I have a couple of those in my pocket, actually. So we'll talk afterwards. And Keith.
Hi, Jared.
Hey, Keith.
All right.
How's it going?
It's good. How are you doing?
Oh,
Is my mic on? Can you hear me, guys? Yes. Okay, great. Thank you for having me out here today. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Nice. Your invitation got my calendar emptied out, which was kind of nice.
That was the plan, actually.
So you saved me from incident review meetings and a bunch of other not so fun stuff.
I think feedback for mid-year is still open.
Thank you, thank you. Hello, everybody. My name is Keith Forsythe. I've been with Capital One for about 5.5 years. I lead engineering for several of our applications and platforms around our core servicing application. So if you're a Capital One customer and you use our Capital One mobile app today, that application, a big chunk of it comes out of my group, as well as the website, as well as the marketing side of the website, the unauthenticated space, and some fun data science work we do over there for A/B testing, different experiences. So previous to that, I was at a startup that was doing pretty well and then got obliterated by a little company called Uber and Lyft. So I was at an early ride-sharing startup, and it was trying to do apps on the BlackBerry and Palm Pre and some of those early ones. If you're any Palm Pre lovers, it holds a good place in my heart. And yeah, I'm happy to be here and happy to answer your questions today. Thanks.
Awesome.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Joe Gang. I lead customer engineering teams for Google Cloud in the Mid-Atlantic. So I have the privilege of working with enterprise customers such as Capital One and many others to figure out how best to adopt public cloud, whether it's Google Cloud Platform or other public clouds and other services like G Suite and others. We're very grateful and thank you for the opportunity, Jared, GDG, and Capital One to co-sponsor this event. Developers are the key to success for a lot of things we'll talk about today. So very grateful for the opportunity to share our perspectives with everybody here.
Awesome. Thank you, Joe. Awesome, awesome, awesome. All right, so I think we're going to start with a couple of questions around public cloud. That's going to be kind of the theme for the next couple of questions, and we're going to kind of rotate through the group. Marcelin, I was thinking specifically in your role with Walmart around everything data engineering and specifically being a data guy. I expect that you've had a lot of experience with public cloud, and so I wanted to ask specifically around what are some of your what are some of the challenges you've gone through within the public cloud, and what are some good strategies to mitigate some of those?
Thanks, Jared. Obviously, the cloud, we have multiple offerings of public cloud, and each of that has its own benefits. And many companies, when they go through, the biggest challenges I see, Jared, are in the investments that they have made over a period of time in the data centers, in their hardware, in their personnel, and how do we migrate or move from that to the public cloud? That is a big dilemma that the companies are having. The second one I noticed is the questions or concerns around the security and the privacy. Particularly the financial services company, anybody who is working with customers, especially if you have something related to the health and wellness, and that has more stringent requirements. So those type of concerns are the second things that comes to anybody's mind. The third one, in my personal experience, you go to cloud and you cannot go to the cloud all at once. You take one step at a time, you go there. When you try to connect your data in the cloud and your data in on-prem, that is where you see the first shock. You expect that to return in a couple of seconds, and it takes more than that. And so the need for the express routes or the interconnects or the peering comes in place for that. And the last one is what type of cloud offering you want to get. You want to go with IaaS or SaaS or PaaS or any other model. Whether you want to go to the tool set that are offered by that public cloud offering, or you want to take your own tools with you. Those are the four major things that I see. There are other things, but these are the four major challenges that are kind of pulling some other companies back, in my opinion, Jared.
Thank you, thank you. And one of the ones you mentioned, I think, is very near and dear to Capital One's heart, which is security, data and security. You know, MPI data and PCI data are things that we care very deeply about, and we pay very close attention to that. What are some of the heartaches? Well, there's a lot of heartache around taking your data from what you mentioned, your own on-prem solution, and then putting into a public cloud that, you know, there's worry that it's not as secure as yours, which is usually not even the right answer. But, you know, it's like, hey, I'm taking the thing out of my piggy bank and putting it in a different piggy bank. What are some of the ways to mitigate those concerns? And is there good tooling? Are there good documentation? Like, what are ways to make sure that you're fully understand the security and the implications within your cloud provider?
And I think it is in three different fronts. One good learning or training. Many times the concerns or the questions come from our questions on what we need to comply on, what is a good ethical method to store the data. Mm-hmm. So educate ourselves to get better understanding of that internal and external. And number two, get help from that public cloud provider. They may have a way to handle it that may not be very publicly advertised, or it may not have been very relevant to you. So work with them. Yep. And the third one is the industry peers. There may be others who may have the same challenge. Partner with them, learn from them. That's how I would approach that.
Okay, very cool. So security actually leads me to my next question. The most secure libraries, for the most part in the world, are open source libraries, right? Because you have literally millions of people who look at them and, you know, will send you PRs or let you know when there are vulnerabilities. Joe, I know that's very important to your to Google Cloud Platform strategy. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. As you said, open source is a critical part of Google Cloud strategy, especially when it comes to Google Cloud Platform. The pattern that we see when we work with all of our customers, and many similar to Capital One and others, is that every customer has a different context. Some customers have made heavy investments in private clouds already. Some still have operational data centers they have to retire and depreciate. Some have already chosen other public clouds. The question is, how do you enable your organization to embrace digital transformation and take advantage of all the assets they have? And that's why I believe open source is critical, because open source can be deployed on-prem. Many developers are already familiar with open source from their own contexts and backgrounds. And for Google Cloud Platform, we are making a choice to embrace open source in two ways. One, contribute. This is why we decided to contribute Kubernetes to CNCF based off our internal systems. So I have a great respect for Capital One and all the work that Capital One's doing with Cloud Custodian, trying to solve a difficult security problem with the contribution of others. For me and my company, we believe that that's the power of open source. To try and figure out how to move workloads or solve portability across multiple environments, whether it's private clouds or on-prem data centers or other public clouds, it's too difficult for one organization to figure out on their own, even to have a few thousand developers. The way to solve is to get the contribution, the diverse perspectives, all the technologists out in the world through open source. And that's why I believe open source is a critical aspect to make sure any organization is successful in public cloud or multi-cloud.
Awesome. That actually ties into my next question really well, where you use contributions from the outside, really the outside world, and contribute back as well to make Google Cloud Platform as resilient as it can be. What is your thought and stance on multi-cloud?
I think multi-cloud is an absolute necessity for companies to be able to manage risk and to transform, right? The way I see it is that clouds are, you could see them as tool sets. I've worked with a customer, for example, where they had a monolithic application. They were using some of the services on AWS as a starting point. They also were running certain database software on VMs and EC2s at an infrastructure level. And when they didn't have certain capabilities or scalability issues and they wanted to start a microservices practice, they just started picking up some of the databases that we run as a PaaS, platform as a service, and integrate it into their microservices framework. So really what it means is that pick the best tools that you need for your context and your business needs, and let us compete with each other and develop the software to fit all the different use cases that are out there, so you have the best of what you need.
Yep. So the next question I have is more around one of the reasons you moved to the cloud is to ensure that your systems are always up and running, right? Resiliency is a big deal at Capital One, and we've actually gone through quite a last really year or so at Capital One trying to ensure that our services are up and running. This is actually for you, Keith. Would you like to talk a little bit about how we're implementing our chaos testing and resiliency strategy?
Sure. The multi-cloud, just like any single point of failure in any system, if you have a single cloud provider, that's a single point. So you definitely want to take a look at what your opportunities there for other things. But Capital One has made a very big investment into our AWS relationship and moving out of our data centers and continuing to get into and move out to the cloud. As we do that, and as we get all of our applications and feature support out there, one of the things we quickly realized is we didn't understand and really didn't know how to use the cloud as effectively as we thought. And so we recently did a really fun exercise where we asked everybody, we're multi-region, we said, hey, if we moved everyone out of East into West, you guys would all be okay, right? And everyone's like, oh yeah, sure, we're fine, no problem. So like, okay, cool. So hey, we're gonna go ahead and cut that cross-connect between the two, and let's see what happens. And now we did this in QA, of course, so but of course, there was some fun sparks that occurred, and it's like, I thought this was okay, yeah, no, it wasn't. So we had a bunch of things going across that we really didn't realize, and so this happened last year, and this really created this culture of like, okay, every month or two, we're gonna do some sort of extreme testing. Internally, we call it extracts, and as you know, and we do something around resiliency to really pressure test the system, both in QA. We run one in QA, and then the following month we run it in production. And so we do these different types of things to check our auto failovers, But it's really just to stress the system and then make sure that everyone truly does know how to set things up correctly in our different systems. So it's been fun.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. So that we'll move on to our second theme now, digital transformation. And as a very smart person who happens to be sitting right next to me said a few minutes ago that putting everything online, removing friction and evaluating and kind of enabling digital channels is really the way that he thinks about digital transformation. What are some of the what are the digital transformations that you've lived through, and what are some of the interesting things, Mohan, that you would like to talk about around digital transformation?
Yeah. So when you think of digital transformation, you think of just taking things online, right? So but there are so many opportunities when you take things online and digitize it for us to improve. The three key buckets, there's always blockchain and a whole bunch of other things that we can talk about, but it always falls in three buckets for us. Because what we do is we offer lending as a service to banks. Banks like Capital One are essentially technology companies. They've got very sophisticated people, two of them on the panel here, right? But there are 11,200 banks and credit unions in the US, right? Out of which probably 20, okay, let's up it to 200, may have sophisticated tech teams. That means that there are 11,000 or so banks and credit unions that really don't have sophisticated technology departments. They sometimes have like 2 people, and that's it, right? So what we do is we offer lending as a service. We're essentially building small business banking as a service for these banks and credit unions. And when we go through the digital transformation with our clients, the 3 things that usually come out are, A, how do you improve the customer experience, right? When it is all paper, you have a huge opportunity to get your CX much better. So that's sort of a key thing that we focus on. The second thing is when things go online, there is a lot of customer intel that you can get. And customer intel is essentially revenue, right? So really capturing the things that the smaller banks in the US that can't do on their own, now we're able to take the customer intel and be able to move that into and monetize that revenue. The other aspect of this is really around how do you get these banks to be more efficient, the associate-facing side of it, because there's a lot of underwriting systems, and those things all happen paper and pen, right? And there's an opportunity to build in some very sophisticated analytics and machine learning when you get things online. So that's the third area where we are able to build in machine learning into credit models and risk management that otherwise you should see how some of the banks do business. You're talking middle America, community banks. They all get into a room and they say, should we fund this person or not, right? So they sit around the table.
I think we might do that too.
Well, no comment.
Kidding, by the way.
No, you guys are very sophisticated. But that's how business happens in most of America, right? So those are the 3 things, including the last one being analytics, machine learning, and get the credit models and the risk models to get better over time that the smaller banks, meaning the majority of them, 11,000 of them, can use. So those are the opportunities while you do digital transformation.
Yep. So digital transformation a lot of times has to do with like, hey, what's out there? What do we need to do? Look, we need a website. We need to go paperless. We need to get a mobile app. We need to, maybe do a couple of other things. But along the way, somebody innovated. Somebody, figured out, hey, this is a cool thing we should do. How do we do it? So I guess, and then they dug in and figured out how to do it. So I guess my question really to the panel is innovation. How do you handle innovation as your standard business as usual process, and how do you fit it in, and then how do you actually get it out the door into production?
I think different companies approach innovation in a different way. The general theme that I have seen is some companies specifically allocate a certain amount of energy or budget for innovation. And they also have some best practices that include optimizing their current process by X percentage. automation, digitization, or any process improvement. So they cultivate that thing. And in addition to that, they specifically target some objectives. Hey, my cost to run this is X dollars. I want to bring it down to X minus this. And how do you do that? And it can produce several supplementary income innovations as well. So that's the general pattern that I have seen in some of the companies that I have interacted with.
Yeah,
Jared, one of the things we think about, whether you call it digital transformation or innovation, I think the common factor is time. The perspective I think you can have is that you're always trying to beat time. Right? How do you do things faster? If you're a developer, people joke about the best developer is the lazy developer who can get more done in less time. But you also think about in dimensions of business. 50 years ago, it took, on average, 75 years for a company to join the S&P 500 that's to become a public company. Nowadays, it takes an average time of 10 years. So the question is, how do you take all of those things that are around you, fit them into your business, and help your business grow and change and be better and beat the competition over time? And one metric I love is that for Netflix thinks that, hey, Netflix is a success because of public cloud, yes, elastic storage and all of that stuff. But I also think one of the most powerful aspects of public cloud to help Netflix is that they even talk about it. When they do major releases, they'll do 600 A/B tests, and 450 will fail, and only 150 of those 600 A/B tests will succeed. So it's enabling your developers, your organization to experiment, test, fail fast, succeed faster, and innovate and digitally transform. And I think thinking about that way, making sure your organization knows that it never stops. It's continual iteration to innovate.
Yeah. So we use internally a methodology called 4DX. It's the 4 disciplines of execution, which essentially says, business as usual is a hurricane that's going to kind of take everything, which is the basis for Jared's question. How do you kind of set goals that you want to achieve, right? So they call BAU the whirlwinds in that methodology. And so you explicitly name what is it that you're going to do that's sort of in the innovation agenda. And what the second thing we do from a product management perspective is we go between run, grow, and transform, right? So we go 70, 20, 20, Keith, so everybody works a little extra, right? So 70, 20, 10 into sort of your transformation agenda. You always pick a project or two every quarter, every couple of quarters, and just focus on it. If you just don't do that proactively, you're just not gonna do it because the demands on everybody is so massive that you're just not gonna get it unless you name it and say that you're gonna do it.
No.
Let me just ask, are folks in the audience, the companies that you work, do you have time out of your sprints or out of your PIs or whatever unit you use? Do you guys have time allocated for personal projects, innovation at work? And a show of hands, yeah. Who does it? And I get a whole like head shake over here. That's a big no. Okay, got it. Okay. Got it. So you're like, this is going to be like 1,900 story points, guys. It's going to take me a while. Okay.
Now the scramble is always for who gets to work on that 10% project, right? So which developer gets to work on it? That is an interesting thing in and of itself. That's topic for some other day.
Yeah, that is unfortunate. We'll say that one of the things that my particular area of the company put in was a project called Project Mercury, which is it's kind of like a submission sort of Shark Tanky thing where teams can submit ideas to a panel, and if your team gets selected, you get a month off to go work on it. And so they do that every quarter, which has been pretty cool. So we get a lot of submissions for that, and a lot of cool things have come out of that. So.
Yeah, so specifically, we talked about the application for DevFestDC. That kind of grew out of some of the Project Mercury work that Keith is describing. And specifically, the framework that we use is a Google framework called Flutter, which you might have heard of. And so we basically proved it out, showed that it would work, and then we went and built things with it. So that's an example of getting something into production and using it more than once, actually. So,
Using Flutter.
Yep. So we actually built it originally for Android Summit last year, and the optimizations we've made is actually we built a back-end dashboard now so we can make updates. So for example, we had to move some rooms around, and if you look at your app, it actually has updated already the rooms. So
Can I ask, how many people in the audience do you have hackathons that are part of your usual? That's about.
some of the other things that we've tried, at least internally, and this was when I was part of Keith's team too, and now I'm not part of Keith's team, though I work on his platform, so I'm his customer. I don't know how that worked, but
Lucky me.
yeah. But we, and I think Keith's team does this too, but we have something called engineering time, and it's a pre-negotiated percentage of our story points every single sprint that you get to work on 3 different things: tech debt, learning, and then innovation time. And so you kind of work that out with whatever you want. You put story points against it. You have JIRA tickets, and then it's part of your commitments. And that's how you actually have time and space to do it.
That's a shameless plug. Cloud Derby downstairs. That's an example of something that's done on our engineers' set aside time. It's a great way for them to learn the Google Cloud Platform. We also thought it'd be a compelling way for developers out in the world to learn it as well. So it helps in many different dimensions.
Yeah, it's lit. I forget what the actual term is, but there's innovate or die. Somebody fairly famous said that. I think it's really important to ensure that you have time and space to do that, whether it's building Google Cloud derbies or apps or whatever. And you learn so much doing it. And guess what? You're motivated to come to work every day. So awesome. All right, so I'm going to transition over to software development at scale. It's near and dear to my heart as well. So applications specifically are getting larger and larger, right? They get more and more features. Your code base gets massive. And so you start throwing more and more resources at it. At some point, it gets too big to really manage, especially in a central way. Keith, this is to you. What is your strategy around building software at scale?
That's a great question. I think earlier in Capital One's journey, I think like a lot of people that went through digital transformation, there was a mad rush by Capital One to get out and take everything from paper to get it on a screen somehow. So you ended up with a lot of different collection of websites and mobile apps, especially at a 50,000 person bank. Some of you may have remembered some of our previous versions of our app, especially if you were an ING customer and then you were forced to come and use our previous version of our app, which there's a few people in this room that might remember the old Cordova app that we all really didn't. Oh my God, John LaBarge.
Oh yeah,
He
John was
definitely.
here.
Hey, John. So that totally threw me off. Thanks, John. So we had to, as we got all these different websites and mobile apps together and said, hey, we got to stop making the same thing over and over again. We got to get everybody on some common platform. So that's what we've been doing for the last few years here, is getting everybody on board into the same code base, trying to get rid of 250 repos everywhere and get that down a little bit more manageable. But because of that, now you've got, we probably have over 1,000 people now committing into one of 3 different projects. And so we've really had to shift our thinking into being just like feature to being, okay, we have a bunch of engineers that work on what we call platform teams and a bunch of engineers that work on feature teams. And so the platform teams are just creating tools, pipeline, best practices, some archetype code that people should take a look at if they're doing certain things, a component architecture on how to componentize your features and just make merges a lot simpler. So that's kind of how we've done that, is really focus on that. And a lot of that has come with like realizing you kind of need to become an internal consulting company. You need to have your own professional services group within the company, your own documentation centers, your own support systems. And so that part of my group that does that operates similar to like a Deloitte or a BCG or anything else that's doing like consulting and has that support there. So that's been a fun journey, but that's definitely the way to go for it. And it results in a single place for customers to come to, which is a really great experience and highly leveraged, much more secure. And so that's definitely the way to go with that.
Yep. To the group, does anyone else have an interesting scalable journey they want to talk about?
I want to add one comment. The scalability is an interesting topic, and when you go from one to another, you have several immediate needs that your customers would want in terms of customization or kind of one feature needing for one group. So you want to fulfill on that fairly quickly. And when you deviate too much from your standards and build a lot of band-aids to provide support to your immediate needs, then it makes it very challenging to go back and pull and scale your current solution to a larger solution or to migrate to a better solution. So it is always a good balance between what you provide to fulfill immediate need versus the scalability.
Yeah, but
Hey, Chair, I'd like to add in about the journey in software development or software development scale. What fascinates me is that every organization is trying to embrace it. Not everyone does it quite the same. But if you look at it from the lens of people, process, and technology, there are a lot of similarities. We talked a lot about the technology, but even think about the process. What fascinates me is that we see other customers in heavily regulated industries, such as healthcare, similar to financial services. Some may do it with Agile one way, others do Agile with another way. But that structure gives their people and their personnel something to lean on to embrace the change and the constant innovation. Some organizations invest in DevOps practices versus SRE. It's across the board, but what I think really brings it all together is a vision. For Google, we call it organized world's data, making university accessible. That's a great vision right there for Capital One, change banking for good. And I think what really catalyzes software development scales is get the right people, motivate them with the vision, and we give them the tools, or as Capital One's been building a platform, we're seeing now customers in healthcare that are building platforms for people to contribute genomic data or healthcare data to solve real big world problems, such as solving rare diseases. So to me, it's fascinating that you can do it in many different ways, but that vision really helps catalyze the software development scale for those dimensions.
yeah, if I can just quickly add, we've got a different type of scale issue. Obviously, Capital One, Walmart, Google are sort of, when you grow very fast from a low base, 60, 70%, it creates its own scale issues. So the way I think of it is, yeah, we all know how to create product teams. We all know how to instrument. But ultimately, architecture is destiny, right, when it comes to producing software at scale. So essentially, the ability to parallelize work, right, is kind of the key thing that you got to optimize on. If you don't do that right from day one, you're going to be in this problem of waiting for somebody to do something else before you can do your thing, which is what slows down at the end of the day. So I always think of good architecture is so important to software development scaling as well.
Cool. And probably the last question. So if anyone has questions, we may have a few minutes left. Well, sure, we can ask it now.
You could speak to the fact, like you talked about risk and using multi-cloud to mitigate risk. How do you feel about cloud vendor independence?
Anyone want to take that?
Cloud agnostic.
Mm-hmm. So the question is how do we feel about cloud vendor, what'd you say, cloud vendor? Independent. So you're agnostic to whatever your cloud is.
Yes.
It almost doesn't matter. How do we feel about that?
Well, I was going to say multi-cloud partly addresses that, right? Having, for example, 2 cloud providers makes you independent of any one.
Certain tools will be only available from certain vendors, as an example.
Correct.
Is it worth the investment to use that particular cloud vendor's tool to give up being tied to one vendor?
So from our Google Cloud perspective, and this is just our perspective, there are many others. This is what investment in open source is our lead choice. We lean open source whenever we can because open source can be deployed on-prem, other clouds. And our preference is to provide managed services deployments of open source as a service. That won't always be the case. But that's why, again, we feel contributing to open source software is critical because when we have all the other people in the world, there are very interesting companies or very interesting open source software out there. It's actually trying to address that problem, say, how do you connect those disparate clouds? It's not even starting from our company. So we believe it's a critical problem to solve, thus Kubernetes, and that's why I'm trying to work with everybody else to solve it. Does that help answer or?
All right. One last question, and then we're going to have to go. We all want to promote underrepresented groups. How does each of you do that in each of your organizations? Maybe with just a minute each.
So at Capital One, we just a couple ways we try to make sure that we're supporting URMs, underrepresented minorities in our different groups. One of the things we do is making sure that we're interviewing, especially, this is true for director and up. Every interview panel, every interview group has to include at least one URM. So to make sure that we're allowing the available time to have a robust and diverse set of folks apply for the positions. There's all other stuff we do also just with women in tech is one group, blacks in tech, Hispanics in tech. We have a lot of different communities of practices around different underrepresented minorities and areas. I'm part of a group called Male Allies that attends a lot of these groups. And so, and it's fun because a lot of times I'm the only person of my particular whatever X, and so you get to feel just a little bit uncomfortable and maybe put yourself in someone else's shoes for a little bit. You know, I'm really proud of the work that we do here with all of those types of different groups and the different sponsorships that we put out there in the market.
So could you repeat the question again?
I said, how do you promote underrepresented groups within your organization?
At Google, diversity is very important. We both do it internally, and we're also trying to do it externally well. Externally, we do events such as I Am Remarkable. So I encourage you to look it up online for yourselves. Is how we try to raise awareness of the issue of diversity along dimensions of gender, amongst others. Internally, there's many ways we do it as well. We have aspects of our hiring process. We're trying to make sure we're eradicating bias. Bias busting is part of our Noogler training. And then we have continual programs where leaders are encouraging conversations or actually making sure teams are having conversations, just raising the awareness about inclusion, because there are many different dimensions where people can feel excluded. There's many different ways you can categorize a non-dominant group. And so we do have constant conversations. And I think the reality is that it's an uncomfortable topic. And there's no one way or prescriptive way to drive successful outcomes with such a personal, uncomfortable topic other than continual conversation and awareness.
At Walmart, we follow, Keith, just like you said, the URMs have a special program and the Women in Tech has a special program. One less obvious thing, when people go out of workforce for pregnancy or some other illness, it's very hard for them to come back to the workforce. They are at a disadvantage due to that gap. So we, at Walmart, we introduced a program called Path Forward, giving preference to them and making sure these many folks will be hired by this time, and especially focusing on that particular population. So we do several things. I just wanted to call that out specifically.
Yeah, you know, it's a struggle. It's not easy, right? So because when people don't know you, right, you're a small company, it's hard to do this well. But one area that we do really well is in hiring veterans, because we started as a veteran-based affinity lender. So that's an area that, you know, 1/3 of our team comprises of military veterans, and we've done a good job with that. But other than that, it's not easy. You know, as we grow bigger, it's something that we'll have to focus on.
Okay. Well, I want to thank all of our panelists, thank the audience, and I really appreciate your time, especially the question. And I wish we had a little bit more time, but thank you again. Thank you.
All right, thank you.